So I'm Lauren Van Hemert, for those of you who don't know at this point. I hope everybody knows. And this is Gavan Pamer. And you are, what is the exact title? Are you in marketing?
I'm the Director of Marketing and Development at Temple Theater, yes. That's my
And
exact title.
And you teach master classes there.
I teach master classes. 2 summers ago, Peggy had me come down to run her summer program. So I was the interim director of education. I do have a background in education as well. I came down 2 summers ago when she was going to do a production of Mamma Mia in Oregon. So I ran the summer camps. And then she said at that time, if I ever wanted to come down, she'd find a full-time job for me. At the time, the full-time job was director of marketing, and so I jumped at it. So I was the artistic director of Pittsburgh Musical Theater in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for 5 years. And then I was also the founding artistic director of Lincoln Park Performing Arts Center, which is in Midland, Pennsylvania. And so I have some marketing experience from both of those. And so I came down to fill this position, but also to be part of that staff, because nobody actually does only what their title is at Temple Theater. We have many hats. And so I direct and choreograph. And when there's a role that's right for me, Peggy throws an equity contract my way and I'll play a role here or there.
So you were on the national tour of Cats, which we're going to talk about.
Yes.
You were on the national tours of 42nd Street and a chorus line. Is that what I read?
Yes, both of those as well. Yeah.
So
that was my very early career. That was still the 80s and the 90s. So
but those are pretty dance heavy shows. So
yes.
At the time when you started, because you're now 29, so you must be
yes, absolutely.
But those are pretty dance heavy shows. Did you consider yourself a dancer first?
I started out as a dancer. I started when I was 6 years old dancing. Tap dancing is my main, is basically what I was trained mainly on. And then when I was around 15, I started choreographing shows because a friend of mine, Sandy Regal, who was a director choreographer, she was a director in the area and a music teacher in Beaver, Pennsylvania, in that area, Beaver County, Pennsylvania. I grew up in Beaver Falls. She lost her choreographer at the time and I was 15 and she said, do you want to choreograph some shows? And she actually taught me how to choreograph. And so as a dancer then, I started choreographing at 15. And so initially I was a dancer. And then one day I found out that I could sing. And so and after all of that, I went to Clarion University. It was college at the time when I was there, Clarion College. And I started out in music education. And then I transferred to Point Park University as a musical theater major after that, and then was at Point Park. But initially I started out as a dancer, so.
Okay, so do you consider now? I know we talked about when you get a little older, it's hard to dance, it's hard to move, hard to get out of bed some days.
Right.
But so do you consider yourself more of an actor now? I know you have your actor's equity card.
Yeah, I say I'm a singer, actor, and dancer. I don't consider myself a dancer anymore just because I haven't kept up with it. We were talking before we started, the last dance show that I actually danced in was 42nd Street for Michael Lichtenfeld and Charlie Repley at Pittsburgh CLO. That's the last time I actually full out danced, and it was a chore because I was out of shape, because I was sitting behind a desk for 10 years and I was being an administrator, and I still have it, and I still pull it out when I can, but I'm just not in the shape that I used to be in, So.
All right. Well, I mean, you did 3 giant tours, so I
dance musicals, yes.
I feel like you get a pass. Now, I saw a chorus line at the Schubert Theater when it was playing there a really long time ago, because there have been many shows there since a chorus line in New York. But when I look at the dance in a chorus line, and I look at the dance in a show like Cats, and I look at the dance in a show like Hamilton or The Prom, Broadway dance has come a long way since a chorus line.
Oh, absolutely.
So where do you see the evolution of dance on Broadway on stage?
Well, it's interesting because we always talk about this style of teaching. Now they talk about teaching Broadway style dance, but the evolution of musicals, much like the evolution of the actual content of the musical, has morphed based on who's actually writing it. And in the golden age of musicals, musical theater choreography was more ballet and jazz oriented. But then with the insurgence of things like So You Think You Can Dance and competition dance, dance in theater became more and more elaborate. The one constant is it still tells a story no matter what type of medium, whether it's the hip hop feel of Hamilton and In the Heights, which is Andy Blankenbuehler's choreography, or you have the athletic choreography like Christopher Catelli's in Newsies. There's still an element that it's always about storytelling no matter what. It's just that the human body has, much like the athletes in the Olympics, have pushed themselves and bettered themselves and do bigger tricks and do larger things. That's sort of what has happened with Broadway dance as well. But some of my favorite musicals have movement in it, and it's not really considered choreography, it's staged movement, which is brilliant in itself as well. So it will always change with what is happening at the time and what's happening on the street. As evidence of West Side Story right now. West Side Story was mainly balletic when Jerome Robbins did it, but now with a new choreography, it has changed and morphed into what this generation wants to see on stage.
I guess so. And it's very interesting you said that, because when I spoke to the people from the prom, they kind of said that. They were like, this is the dance that people, our audiences, are going to want to see on stage now.
Yeah.
The other big difference, I think, with dance then and dance now is before chorus line, you had dance choruses, dance ensembles. That's what they did. Now everybody has to be a triple threat.
Correct. And it was actually, a chorus line was sort of the catapult of that, because as everybody knows, a chorus line started with sort of these taped sessions. It was Tony Stevens and Sean Peacock got together and were talking about creating sort of like this repertory company of dancers in New York. And it sort of morphed into that when Michael Bennett got involved. And for the first time, dancers were actually stepping forward and speaking. You know, whenever there were small parts in shows and musicals of the golden age, the singing chorus, there was a singing chorus and a dancing chorus, and the singing chorus were always the ones who played the small parts. So they would step out of the singing chorus to get to say lines. Well, it wasn't until a chorus line when dancers were actually asked to speak on stage. And so chorus lines sort of created that triple threat that we now expect everybody. I mean, if you look at the ensembles, a lot of the musicals now, there are truly people my age, that are still dancing and singing in the ensembles of Broadway, and they're in their 50s, because you need character actors as well. And you're still expected, even at the end of prom, all of the principal dancers have to dance the finale. Same thing with Mean Girls. All of the dancers, all of the character actors in the show, Memphis, every single person at the end of that show has to dance. So it doesn't matter what age or what ability you have, musicals, chorus line created the triple threat.
Yeah. Yeah. It really changed the game, I think, in a lot of
I think for everybody. And I think, with how Prince is, with Company and that being sort of a transition in musical theater with the nonlinear storytelling, same thing with the chorus line and Michael Bennett, it became nonlinear storytelling. So they created this new way of telling stories, which is why you have productions like the new Oklahoma, where they're literally turning Oklahoma on its ear and presenting it in a way that you haven't seen before. But then you still have traditional shows. The producers was totally going back to the tradition of the musicals that it had been in the golden age, and people are like, it's a new hit, and I'm like, but it's a golden age musical. When you really look at the structure of it, it's really a golden age musical.
And I do gravitate. I will say, we talked about Hello Dolly, and we'll talk about Hello Dolly towards the end. I love the golden age musicals, or those type feel musicals.
Yeah, I do too. And well, we talked about Oliver, even though there's something very dark in the story aspect of it. I am a true traditionalist and a theater historian. My friend Dina Muro calls me the the Rain Man, musical theater Rain Man, because I have all this useless information in my head about musicals, and I love it. At the same time, I also still love discovering new musicals, and I'm the first one to be, when somebody starts raving about some new musical, I'm the first one to be go like, I'm not interested, and then eventually I'll go around and watch it and think, oh, there's good structure, there's good storytelling, it's fun, and I'll come around to it. But I'm one of those people that still wants to keep and teach the younger generations of 100 years worth of musicals that they don't know about, that they've never seen, and some of us still have to keep that alive,
That are glorious, like Hello Dolly's, like My Fair Ladies, like
correct, absolutely.
Singing in the Rain. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
It's funny. I've done a lot of these interviews since this quarantine began, and so many people point to Singing in the Rain as their first musical movie experience, and that's how they fell in love.
I grew up, my mother loved movie musicals, and I grew up seeing all of those movie musicals, and I wanted to grow up to be the next Gene Kelly. But by the time I became of age, they weren't making movie musicals anymore. So I was like, oh, I guess I'll turn to musicals now. So around 15, 16, I realized, oh, there's Broadway as well. So, everybody else was talking about the first LP they ever bought. The first LP I ever bought was the London cast recording of Fiddler on the Roof. And so as a 12-year-old, everybody else was listening to, songs from the 70s, and I was listening to Fiddler on the Roof. Yeah, I was unique.
I was listening to Annie. Annie was my first Broadway cast recording, and I'm not ashamed to say I loved the movie cast recording of Xanadu.
Oh, I own it too, and I've done a production of Xanadu. Yeah, so
I know that's a great show.
It's a great show, and
do it again soon.
Yeah. I actually was fortunate to work on a production of it in Pittsburgh at Pittsburgh CLO. They have a cabaret space, and they did a 5-person version of Xanadu, which is really excellent, which is perfect for the Temple stage. So Peggy and I keep talking about it. Someday Xanadu will be on the Temple stage with 5 people, but
Peggy, let's make it happen. It's such a fun show, and it really plays up the camp of the movie.
It does.
So it's almost better than the movie, I think.
It is. Well, the movie is terrible, but it's so terrible you have to love it. I mean, I was an ELO fan and an Olivia Newton-John fan, and I love, and of course Gene Kelly is in it.
Yeah.
But like I was, I love Gene Kelly, and I grew up watching him dance. He and Fred Astaire, and I know my collection of movie musicals is as extensive as my musical theater library as well. But it was a bad movie, but there are some great things in it, and they made a great musical out of it.
Gregory Hill is saying 7 Brides for 7 Brothers was his mother's favorite, and they would always watch it when it came on TV. So we just, and Sound of Music, I would say Sound of Music, anytime it came on TV, was something my family always watched and still watches now.
Sound of Music was the first musical I ever saw live, was The Sound of Music.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. Who was in it? Do you remember who was in it?
You'll laugh at this. It was at my church. It was Christ the Divine Teacher Catholic Church. And in the fellowship hall, Sam Rocco, my piano teacher, Dr. Emma Rocco, her son, Sam, and my sister, Laureen, started a theater company, which was the Christ the Divine Teacher Players. And that was the first musical I ever saw, and that was before my sister was involved with it. And the first musical I was ever in with the Christ the Divine Teacher Players was Annie, Get Your Gun. So I think that was my first musical on stage. But I remember watching it. We were in Fellowship Hall. It was The Sound of Music. And actually Father Sangle, our parish priest, played the priest in the wedding session of Sound of Music. So I'll never forget it.
Mm-hmm. My only Sound of Music, I was in a production of The Sound of Music, and I was cast as Maria, and they told me to cross, and I'm Jewish, so we didn't get the memo on how to cross when I was growing up, and I crossed backwards, and everybody laughed, and I couldn't figure it out. I was like, why is this isn't funny? But
right.
So do you want to talk, before we jump into Cats, about how you and Peggy met on a production of The Sound of Music?
Yes, we actually did. It was back, I think, 1990. Peggy and I was at West Virginia Public Theater. At the time, it was called Lakeview Theater. But Peggy was playing Maria in The Sound of Music. And this was after, of course, she had done, I think, 2 Broadway shows at that point. And they brought her in from New York. And of course, I came in from Pittsburgh. And Peggy was Maria in The Sound of Music. And I was Friedrich at the age of 22. And Craig Ryan, who actually directs at the Temple, he's directed quite a few plays at the Temple, was the director. So Craig and Peggy and I have a very long history together. Craig and I started working at West Virginia Public Theater. Our first show together was Company it was my first professional summer. It was 42nd Street Company, Fiddler on the Roof, and Funny Girl was my first professional summer. And Craig was one of the directors that summer. And then we worked together with Peggy on The Sound of Music that long ago. And that's how long I've known Peggy. We were 12.
So when we talk about Peggy, so you all know, because some of you may not know, we're talking about Peggy Taphorn, who is the fantastic, dynamic dynamo. Literally, she was going to play Donna in Mamma Mia, but she's the fabulous artistic director over at Temple Theater in Sanford.
Yes.
Producing artistic director.
Producing artistic director, yes. And everything. Like I said, none of us actually do only what our job title is. She does so many other things as well. And we're all grateful and thankful to have her as our leader because she has been terrific through this sort of trying time that we're all going through and the theaters are all going through. And we're thankful to have her as a leader and a friend. I mean, she really has looked out for all of us.
Yeah. She's a good director, good leader, good champion, not just of Temple Theater, but of the whole downtown
Sanford. Yes, she absolutely. She is truly one of the many people who has moved to Sanford. She isn't just someone who's coming in here to be a part of the theater. She has come in and sort of ingratiated herself to the entire town. And because of that, we've created so many great partnerships because of her outgoing nature. And, because theater doesn't survive in a vacuum, and you need to make partnerships with everybody. And she's so charismatic and wonderful and has become such a stalwart in the town here, which is one of the reasons why I moved here. When I was here 2 summers ago, my partner Alva came down to visit and said, "I've never seen you happier." I'm like, well, because I love the town. I love the theater we're in. We're in a 1925 historic theater. And I get to work with Peggy Taphorn. So why not? So we moved.
and it's really a beautiful building. When everything opens up again, if you have not been down to Temple Theater, they do a whole season of truly family-friendly shows. They're not children's shows per se, but they are. Most of them are family friendly. You could take your kids.
They are. We have, one of the things we are proud of is our education arm of our organization. And we have so many wonderful families that support our organization. And because of that education arm, our shows do tend to be family oriented because that is the people and that is the town itself. I mean, there are plenty of theaters in this area that do cutting edge theater and do the types of theaters that children can't go see. But again, I'm all about education and I'm all about passing on those wonderful shows. And every year we do try to put a new show to introduce our audience to something different. Last year we did The Last 5 Years, which is something that typically doesn't skew on the Temple audience, but Peggy makes it a choice every year to try to do something new and introduce something more current and maybe a little more edgy, but we do, all of our shows are family friendly,
Yeah, I like that. I like that. I brought my kids to see shows there and my husband and my mom. So multi-generational, and that's lovely. Yeah. So before you were in Cats, you were on the 4th national tour of Cats.
Yes, the 4th national tour. So there was the first national, which started in Boston, the second, and it sat down in Boston. I don't think I think it went to Philadelphia. I think it played maybe 10 cities. The second national was the LA company, and that sat in LA and never went anywhere else. Then there was a 3rd national tour, which is actually the first time that I saw Cats at the Benedict Center in Pittsburgh. That was in 1985. And that was the 3rd national. That was only out for 1 year. And I remember seeing the show, and after the lights came up afterwards, I looked at my friends who I was with and said, well, that's a show I'll never do, because I saw it and thought I could not do anything in that show. And then the fourth national, which is the company that I was with, was designed to load into a theater in 8 hours and come down in 3. And so because of that, the show ran consecutively for 12 years. And while we were on the road, our company beat the original 1943 national tour of Oklahoma's record for touring the longest. We have since...
So how long were you on tour?
I was on tour for 3.5 years, but the show itself the fourth national ran for 12 years. Now, both Les Mis and Phantom have run for 18 years. And I think Phantom ran the longest, but there was and that's consecutively running. So there was a company of Les Mis that ran for 18 years on the road, and there was a company of Phantom that ran for 18 years on the road. So our company was out 12 years, and I was there 3.5 of those 12 years. Yeah, I started in 1992.
Wow. So you were with the show. Now, did you start out as Mungo Jerry, or did you start out in some other?
I did start out as Mungo Jerry. I was actually a senior in I auditioned for the show 4 times. And the only reason I auditioned for the show was on one of the trips through Pittsburgh. The show was playing Heinz Hall my senior year of college. And they were having an open call for dancers because both CMU and Point Park are located in Pittsburgh. And so they knew that there was a contingency of really great dancers because a lot of dancers had already gone through the company, the Cats company. And so they decided to have a dance call while they were in Pittsburgh. So as a senior in college about to embark on a career, I went to the call, and that's was my first time auditioning for the show. And actually at that particular call, they kept 2 people that day. Kathleen Marshall, actually, here's a tidbit of information. Kathleen Marshall, Tony Award winning director, choreographer, was the assistant dance captain on the show at the time. And so she was actually helped running the audition. And I had worked with Kathleen at the Pittsburgh Playhouse, which is associated with Point Park. So I went to the call, and there were 2 people kept to the end. And that was myself and Billy Porter were the 2 last people that were left at the end of the call. And David Caddick, who was Andrew Lloyd Webber's right-hand man, music person at the time, we were the only 2 people to sing that day. And Billy got the Broadway company of Miss Saigon from that. And then I was called back 3 other times for the show. So
we were talking about Cats. You had seen it and you never thought you would do the show. Mm-hmm. Then you auditioned for it right after college.
I was a senior in college, and the show came through Pittsburgh. It was playing Heinz Hall, and I was saying that Kathleen Marshall was the assistant dance captain at the time. And so I had worked with Kathleen at the Pittsburgh Playhouse while I was in school, because the Pittsburgh Playhouse had a professional company. And there were 2 people that were kept at the end, Billy Porter and myself. And we both sang for David Caddick. And Billy got the Broadway company of Miss Saigon from that audition. And I was called back to the Broadway company. They called me in twice for Skimbleshanks for the Broadway company. And on my second time in for Skimbleshanks, they offered me the German company, but I was like, I don't know if I want to go to Germany. And then I had graduated school, and then I was doing a production of Dames at Sea at the Pittsburgh Playhouse. And the Cats company called me again and said, we'd like you to come to New York for an audition. The Mungo Jerry opened up. And I was, of course, on a contract. And I said, I can't make it because I'm in rehearsal for a show and I can't afford to fly to New York. And they said, oh, no, we're going to fly you to New York. And so I went to the director and said, I have this audition for Cats. They're going to fly me to New York. Can I go? And she was like, you have to be back at rehearsal. Rehearsal starts at 5:30. And so they hooked me up on a flight at like a red-eye flight, cheap red-eye flights from Pittsburgh to New York. I went in, we all learned the combination. They literally took everybody off the Winter Garden stage. They danced me, I sang, and they said, okay, go home. And I got back on a plane and came back to Pittsburgh. And when I got into rehearsal, the choreographer said to me, and gave me a piece of paper and said, Cats called, go downstairs and call them back. And so they had it was a quick replacement. That was on let's see, we started Tuesday. That was a Wednesday, and I was out on the road the following Wednesday. So they hired me, and a week later I was out on the road and I started playing Mungo Jerry. And that was October 7th, 1992 is my anniversary with Cats. Consequently, I only remember that because the Broadway show opened on October 7th, 1981. So I remember that. Stupid dates to remember.
You've got these factoids in your head. Next time we do theater trivia, we're going to have to pull you in for questions.
Musical theater Rain Man. Thank you, Dina Muro. Musical theater Rain Man. Yep. Yeah.
So talk to me. That is, I mean, Cats, if you just go into Cats as a dance showcase, then you will probably love Cats. If you go into Cats looking for some sort of deep meaning, and I've heard a lot of people try to explain to me the meaning behind Cats, then I'm thinking it's not going to be as joyful for you.
Yeah. It's interesting because it is, and still to this day, one of the most fulfilling shows I've ever performed in. The original production that we did was 2 hours and 45 minutes long. They've since trimmed it down and done different things to it and rearranged some things in the new production that's out. But our show was 2 hours and 45 minutes, and it was 2 hours and 45 minutes of literally crawling across the country on your hands and knees, because it's physically taxing. You're crawling, you're dancing, you're singing. It's exhausting, but it was one of the most fulfilling at the end of the night when the audience is applauding and you've made it through another performance. It's thrilling when it is not killing your body. Like at the top of your game, it's great. And I think anybody who's gone through any company of Cats sort of has this understanding that it's we all know what it's like to go through that. Same thing with companies of a chorus line. There's a legacy to a chorus line, legacy to 42nd Street as well, with many shows. I'm sure the same thing with Hamilton, the same thing with Wicked and all these long running shows, Phantom of the Opera, Les Mis. There's sort of this family that you join and you all are sort of in it together. You understand what it's like, what you have to eat for the length of time that you're on the road, what you have to do. Like when I was with the show, we were all gym fanatics and we went to the gym. In addition to doing a 2 hour and 45 minute show, we spent our days in the gym too, but you had to keep yourself healthy enough to do that. And we had a lot of swings that went on during the show, but it's so much different now. We were that type of company that didn't like to miss shows, and you were literally out of the show because you had the flu or you had a broken leg. We really prided ourselves on being healthy and staying in the show. But
it's one of those shows that people love it or they hate it.
Yeah.
So why is Cats so polarizing?
Well, I think, it's based on a book of poems, and basically Andrew Lloyd Webber, it was sort of, I guess an experiment in taking poetry and musicalizing it, really is what he did. And it was a book that he loved as a child, and then was in an airport one day and picked it up and thought, oh, let's musicalize this, and then realized it could be a show. And trust me, there are many other shows out there that are just as confusing as Cats. But there is an actual story to Cats. The unfortunate thing is that it's not part of the plot or the show itself. When you join the company, the first thing that the production stage manager does is sit you down and tell you the story of Cats. And there are all these storylines with all of our company had 22 cats on stage. Some companies have 22, some have 24, but ours had 20 cats on stage. And he tells you about your relationship with all of the other cats and what's happening and why that's happening and why the Jellicle Ball is happening. But the audience has never actually given that. But I think what's interesting, again, it's a story that's being told, but you're telling it through movement and you're telling it through this convention of these poems and these songs. Successful show, our company was very successful in the fact that audiences were thrilled by it. And I think it's difficult telling a story that runs sort of concurrently with what's coming out of your mouth, because you're basically introducing a new cat. And basically that's what it is. This cat is my choice to go to the Heaviside layer, and this is somebody else's choice to go to the Heaviside layer. And then all of a sudden Grisabella comes in and disrupts it all. Oh, and who's that cat? But there's something interesting about it. And I think with the movement that Gillian Lynn created, you know, you're watching this sort of tribe of cats, you know, and you're let into their world. I think that's one thing that was always with us on the road. They kept saying, we don't want the audience to be here. You know, they're invading your space. We let them in. And so it's sort of like this little slice of life into, I mean, everybody who owns a cat knows that they're assholes. Cats are assholes. And they want you to pet them when they want you to pet them. And when they don't want you around, you know, and they live their lives. And, you know, it's unlike dogs rely on us, you know, cats think that they rule the house, and they really do. I mean, that's truly what it is. Our cat here rules the house. She does whatever she wants, and we adore her. And she meows at us when she wants food or wants to be pet. And I think why it's so polarizing is the fact that if you go in with that sense of, I'm getting to see into this world that we're not allowed to be in, or if you're just going in saying, impress me, you're not going to be impressed. Or I don't know, it all depends on how you approach it.
But it really is a spectacle show. I mean, if you're going for a spectacle, Cats, I think, you know, was part of that era of Phantom of the Opera, Miss
Yes.
Saigon, Cats. Those were the first big Broadway spectacles that I could really think of.
And they are. And what's really funny about it is the technology that was on our road, and the technology of the time of the 80s is so antiquated with what you can do with musicals these days. But there's still, you know, I went and saw a student of mine in the national tour of Cats after I had done it for years, and he graduated and went and got on the national tour. And it was, surprisingly enough, the set and costumes from my company, but they redesigned it, and they had all these LED lights and all these different things. And we used to use flash pots. I mean, people used to catch on fire, and they had these confetti cannons, but like all of the technology completely changed from when I was there. And it was, for being a spectacle, it was so antiquated. It's the same thing with the Phantom of the Opera that's been running for 30 some years on Broadway now, is still using, there's still some 1980s technology that they just can't change because it doesn't exist anymore. So they have to just keep fixing it. But they can incorporate other things into it. Of course, lighting has changed. But when a show is running and it's up that long, to update something like that is difficult to do. But it was that era in the 80s that saved Broadway. You know, because of the AIDS crisis in the 80s, a lot of the creative staff and a lot of the performers in the 80s had passed away from the AIDS crisis, that Broadway was dying. By 1985, they were producing, like, there were, you know, very few musicals at the time. And so it was Cameron Mackintosh and Andrew Lloyd Webber and Cameron Mackintosh, really, who started bringing these British imports in that sort of revived, you know, Broadway at the time. And I was just fortunate to be on the trailing end of that. And I say trailing end because it still ran till like 2004, after I had left the show for many years. But
so, being in the show that long, did you ever get to meet any of the creatives behind the show?
Yes, we did. Our company we were fortunate enough. I mean, it's interesting. I auditioned for David Caddick, who was Andrew Lloyd Webber's right-hand man. And at the time, I think Eddie Robinson, who's a musical director at NCT, he was the music supervisor of that company. So I worked with Eddie then, and I worked with a lot of amazing conductors that came through. I worked with, our dance supervisor was Richard Stafford, who was one of the original choreographers on the show. Our director was David Taylor. But we were fortunate when Cats broke a chorus lines record on Broadway. We were playing in, Connecticut. New Haven, Connecticut. Our company was in New Haven, Connecticut, and they actually arranged it that way so they could give us the night off so we could go into New York to be a part of the celebration of Cats breaking a chorus lines record. And so my friend Larry Giroux, who was a contemporary with all of the original cast, with all the creatives, there was a huge party that night. And of course, we all got to meet Andrew Lloyd Webber, got to meet Gillian Lynn, got to meet half of the original cast. Cynthia Rubia actually came out and was our dance supervisor for a while. She was the original Victoria on the show. But yeah, so we did get to meet them. Kristen Blodgett, who also is, was conductor on Phantom for a very long time, and she also is one of Andrew Lloyd Webber's conductors across the world. She came out a few times, and so every once in a while, when you spend that much time on the road, supervisors come out and touch the show and leave, and so yeah, you do get to meet them. But I was fortunate to meet them all at the record-breaking show in New York City. So
that's pretty exciting.
it is. It really is. And the amount of people that I have met because of the connections that I have with all of the people, and thank goodness for social media. There are so many friends that I met through the company who have gone on to these amazing careers that all were in Cats at one point or another. And because of that legacy of that family, you know, oh, I did the show with so-and-so at this time. And it's just interesting. Yeah.
In my house, Cats has, I told you, in my house, we kind of have a love-hate relationship with Cats because my son, it was his first show. We saw the national tour when it came through Raleigh.
What year?
He's 21 now, and he was probably 5 at the time. So I'm not good with math, but
it was probably me. I was probably in the show at the time.
Well, and if you were, then he loved Mungo, Jerry, and Rumpelteazer.
It could have been me. I was in the show between 1992 and 97. I did it for 3.5 years, and I was off between 94. I left in December of 94 and came back to the show in 96. And I left on my birthday, 1997, August 10th, 97. So I was a total of 3.5 years.
So you were before we saw it. He was he was born in 99. So
okay, so he was 5. So it wasn't me.
4-ish. Yeah. And
that was my company though. So if it was 2004, that was still my company that was touring.
It was touring.
Yeah.
And he fell in love with the show. Yeah. He was about 5 years old, and there was a video that had come out. A 1998 video version. He had asked for it for a birthday or Christmas or whatever the occasion was, and we wore it out. We literally wore it out. He watched so many times, and I thought we were the only people on earth who had to suffer through that video quite as many times as we did. But then I came to find out that people love that video.
Yeah. Well, it's very rare, and we see a lot more of it now. We see a lot of these Broadway companies that are recording the shows and putting it out there. And we're so fortunate right now in the time that we're living in that a lot of these exist. You know, I watched Frankenstein last night with Benedict Cumberbatch, you know, from the National Theater, and at the time, for everybody who loved Cats, those types of shows and those types of documenting that type of performance didn't exist. So that really was great because the only way that you could see Cats was if it came through town or if you went to New York City. So having that video to watch over and over again, that didn't happen. So
it made it very accessible.
Absolutely.
And so you would think, because that video was so successful, that the movie version would have been successful. And one might argue that the movie was a disaster unless you were drinking while you were watching it.
Correct.
But you have not seen the movie, so why have spending that much time of your life on that show? Why have you resisted?
I have such a love with the show, and because I knew the show and I knew the show in its original form or some form of the original, and it's tough. I watched a huge documentary on why Cats was the movie was not successful, and it has to do with the medium that it's in. And I think the theatrical aspect of it and the live aspect of it, of this live audience sort of converging on this junkyard, they sort of tried to put a storyline to Cats, which we know there isn't one. And then they also put a lot of stars in the show that needed to have sort of an outlet. And so they just let them ad lib. And, you know, in particular movies that have a narrative to it, if somebody ad libs and the joke lands, or it's funny, or if it's funnier than what's originally written, that's great. But in something like Cats, you do have to transform the concept of the show. A perfect example is the movie Chicago. Rob Marshall,
Yes.
he actually used a concept that was believable to the audience. There is very little, I think, that's believable to Cats to begin with, but when you watch it live, you are enamored by the spectacle of it. You suspend disbelief, but also the way that the choreography is designed. Gillian Lynn's choreography makes you believe that, oh, they're really cats on stage. The way they move, and there was a lot that was put into that. Just being able to stand up on your hind legs is ridiculous, but you rehearse a lot how to do that to make it believable that you're still a cat. It's not just a human in fur standing on stage. And I think with this movie, I think that it just wasn't, they didn't adapt it in the right medium for that and the right perspective, but they also didn't stick to what was successful in the show. But again, I don't think the show would be successful as a movie musical, because what the video you fell in love with was just a documentation of the Broadway show,
Of the stage version.
And it still loses something. There's still something that's lost in that translation, but they were basically just documenting the stage version. Mm-hmm. And I don't think the concept was, and again, I eventually will probably get around to watching it. I doubt it, because the few things that I've seen of it, because everything is CGI'd as well. So even the dancing, when you see someone on stage doing flips and flipping across the stage, it's a spectacle and it's spectacular. I mean, I traveled the country with some of the most incredible tumblers who tumbled 8 times a week that were spectacular. I mean, I did tumbling in the show as well, and I know what it takes to do that in the show. But when you can literally just CGI somebody flipping through the air and doing all this stuff, I mean, you can believe it when they're superheroes, but cats are not superheroes. So
no, and I would say if that 1998 video version is still floating around, and so if people really want to see a version of Cats, I would recommend the 1998 video version. I will say I did see the revival. Andy Blankenbuehler choreographed the revival, and he choreographed the movie as well. But the revival was very much a nod to the original choreography.
Yes, it was. He built upon Gillian Lynn's original choreography and updated it in a sense to make it more accessible to this particular generation.
And it was glorious. My children, it was the first time my daughter had seen Cats, was the revival a few years ago. My son had wanted to see it. He was graduating, and we took him on a graduation trip to New York. Wanted to see Cats, and it was such a delightful experience. And what made it delightful is at the stage door when they came out, and I fear we're going to lose stage doors for a long time.
For a while now,
yeah. I don't think we're going to have that experience anymore. But at the stage door, each performer who came out spent so much time with the kids, because there were so many kids like my son who had fallen in love with the show. And so they just went down the line, and they really made each child feel special.
It's interesting, in the day and age that I was doing the show, social media didn't exist when I was on the road. Like half the technology that we have today didn't exist when, Peggy and I talk about this all the time. These kids have it easy. We used to have to mail our paychecks back to our banks. But it was funny. We used to play a trick, because we were always swarmed at the stage doors with people, but it wasn't always kids. It was, adults alike. And one of the jokes we used to do is they would go, because they wouldn't know that we were in the show. You'd come out of the stage door and they would say, "Were you in the show?" And the joke was, no, I wasn't, but he was. And you would run to get to the bus.
You would run the other way.
Because there was an early bus to get back to the hotel and a late bus to get back to the hotel. And you always wanted on the early bus. And so you would go, "I wasn't, but he was," and you'd run to so that was the joke we used to always play. No, he was. So, but again, we had Cats fans, and now they have fansies and they have fanalos and they have but we had Cats fans that used to travel around the country, and it was crazy that you'd come out of the stage door and someone would open up their art book and have a complete rendering of you as Mungo Jerry that they had drawn, and I have no idea where they got a picture or whatever or came up, but there were people that traveled around the country, and there are still people to this day that are fans of cats. There's a Facebook page that is a cats page that is fans of cats.
Fandom, yeah.
It's a fandom.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, and I think there is something very special about seeing it live.
Yes.
I always tell this funny story. You know, my sister hates musicals, and she came to New York. I was living in New York for a summer. She came to New York, and I said, well, I got to take her to see a Broadway show, but I won't want to spend a lot of money to take her because she hates it. So we did see Cats, and they said, we only have partial view seats. And I was like, whatever the cheapest is. And we were sitting in the set.
Yeah.
And it was
on stage.
Glorious.
Yeah. Meanwhile, she's like, if one of these cats touches me. Yeah.
I know. They kept touching her, and she was intrigued. She was like, I mean, you know, I don't think that would happen nowadays where performers would touch somebody, but they kept messing with her hair. It was great.
Yeah.
So on your resume, you were also the associate director choreographer for the national tours of the Goodbye Girl and Hello Dolly.
Yes. Yeah, that was I can't even remember what's the production? I can't remember the production company, but it was my friend Bob Durkin. It was through Pittsburgh Musical Theater, who I was the artistic director of for a while. One of the tours, The Goodbye Girl, starred Eddie Mecca from Laverne and Shirley and my dear friend Connie Salutis. And there were wonderful people in that show who went on to other Broadway careers as well. But it went out of Pittsburgh, and we were sort of trying to like revive the show, The Goodbye Girl, because it really didn't fare well on Broadway. They had done a London company of it, and we were trying to sort of make the show work, turning it around. And at the time, with a company I worked in Pittsburgh, I was fortunate to actually get to work on the show. And The Big Ragu starred in our show, and we sent it on the road for a year. So it was out on the road for a year. Yeah.
And then Hello Dolly, which you're bringing to Temple Theater
next season. Yes. I love Hello Dolly. I had never been in a production of, you know, it's funny, I had never been in productions, and it was like the last couple of years that I got to actually be in these productions. I was in a production of Hello Dolly. The first time I actually was in it was in 2004 at Pittsburgh CLO with Victoria Clark, but I had done other productions up to that point. I was the choreographer on the 2000 national tour. I can't remember the name. There's something Wind. It was out of the DC area. Everybody who worked on that tour is going to hate me because I can't remember the name of the company. But anyway, my friend Bob Durkin was the director as well, and we put out a national tour. And then from that, I had done a production at West Virginia Public Theater that I choreographed, and I directed at Pittsburgh Musical Theater. And so now, after doing the show for so many times, I think this is my 6th production of the show, that I love it in every form that it is. And we're going to be bringing it to the Temple Theater, which it's such a great story. It's a story of hope. It's a story about rejoining life. It's a story about love. And there's just something wonderful about the story. So I'm excited because there's great dance numbers in it. It's some choreography that I'm really proud of, that is choreography that I helped develop, which is great. So
that's so exciting. And who was Dolly when you took the show on tour?
Tracy Roston was our Dolly on the road. She is a wonderful character actress in New York. She did the Bye Bye Birdie tour with Tommy Tune and Anne Reinking. She was in one of course, the original companies of Hair that was out on the road. And J. Lee Flynn, who has since passed on, was our Vandegelder. It was a run. And consequently, a group of young performing kids that now all have Broadway careers. And yeah, it was nice to like know them when, you know, I say that about a lot of people. I knew them before they became famous. So
before. So when you revisit a show like Hello Dolly, this, like you said, this will be your 6th production. What have you learned from the other 5 productions that you would bring to this production? Well,
it's interesting because every production you do, no matter how many times you do it, is a new production. And you might think you're remounting it in your head, but the people in the room all bring something new to it. And I think doing it at the Temple is going to be exciting for me because the show was designed as one of those traditional musicals in one, where there are scenes that play while they change the set in the back and do all that. But there's something new that you have to be creative about every environment that you do it in, and also in every time that you do it in. A show like A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum played very differently in the 1960s as it does in an era like today. And the same thing with Hello, Dolly was brought back into the public consciousness because of this recent revival and because someone like Bette Midler was helming it. It's a great piece of theater, but again, it brought a whole new generation of people to it because she was playing, she was in the show. And it definitely is a tour de force for the woman playing Dolly. And of course, it's our intent that Peggy is playing our Dolly. I don't know if that's been announced or not, but sorry, Peggy, if we didn't say that. But Peggy is at the right time in her life, and she's the right type of performer to do it. And in particular, my production has a very dancing Dolly. I designed, for the national tour, we did it a certain way for Tracy. When I did it with Aline Robertson at West Virginia Public Theater, the choreography changed based on her skills. When I did it in 2001 with Lenora Nemetz, who is a Fosse dancer, she's a spectacular dancer, actress, and singer. I sort of reimagined the show based on her dance skill, so you can put more dancing into it. With this, Peggy's that type of Dolly, but at the same time, everything changes about the show based on what that particular artist brings to it and what each individual, because there are 8 principals in the show. It's not just Dolly. There's Vandegelder, there's Cornelius and Irene and Barnaby and Minnie and Ambrose and Ermengarde. And there are so many aspects and dynamics to all of those performers. And what's interesting is every time you approach something is finding out what new things you can do. And it's not changing dialogue or doing anything like that, but it's approaching it in a different way. On the road, it was all about, I was focused mainly on the dances when I was putting that show together with Bob Durkin. And then each show sort of morphed into the things that I liked in the shows and finding the new jokes, or someone might find a joke elsewhere. So you tailor it to that. And the Temple Theater is, it's great, but it's challenging in a way because it is a 1925 theater and we do have fly space limitations. So Hello, Dolly is a very drop heavy show, but you have to find a way to do that in a way that you don't use as many drops or whatever. So it's fun being creative and revisiting something that you love so much, and reinventing it for that particular space.
And it is a happy pill. It is
it really is.
Show full of iconic songs. When the revival came, I saw the revival in New York with Bette Midler, and then when it came last year, I took my daughter to see it, and she really didn't want to see it. She was like, "I really don't like these old timey shows, Mom."
Yeah, right.
And she loved it. She fell in love with it and kept saying, "That song comes from this musical, that song." So it's great when the young ones can discover great musical theater from before.
And that's what I love doing. So often I worked at Lincoln Park Performing Arts Center, and we housed the Lincoln Park Performing Arts Charter School, which was a grades. Originally, it was a 9 through 12 school, and then it became a 7 through 12 high school for performing arts. And I was fortunate to be one of the founders and creators of that school. It's so funny when you mention a show and you get this reaction from them like, "Oh, I can't believe it." But then when they actually start working on the show and they delve into, "Oh, there's good story here." And they deal, the people at this, era dealt with the same things that I'm dealing with now. And it's interesting getting them to like open up their mind. But the hard part is getting them in the door to see that, especially the younger generation, because they think if it's anything before what's on Broadway now or what is created, from before Spring Awakening, nobody really wants to see it. But there is really great musicals all the way back to the Rodgers and Hammerstein age, when the content of what they're dealing with in Carousel and in South Pacific are still things that we deal with today. And it's just a matter of telling those stories and bringing those stories to light and telling them in a way that our generation now will accept it. Like I said, funny thing happened on the way to the forum. In the 60s, half of the jokes totally landed because they're funny. Now you have to be very careful in the Me Too generation of how you tell that story. You can still tell that story and still do it in a way that it's empowering for the women who are playing the courtesans, which I did a wonderful production of it at the Pittsburgh Public Theater with Ted Pappas, who was the artistic director at the time. And it was very difficult because he had done the show 20 years earlier in a time when nobody cared about the content. But now there are a lot of times that you look at a show and you read through the script and say, oh, we can't do that. There are times that Peggy and I have read through plays, and our question is, how do you present that in this day and age where people aren't going to get up and walk out because of the content? And I've seen that, as ridiculous as it sounds, I've seen people get up and walk out over the content of 1776, which is ridiculous. And I think that's one of the great things that we do at Temple is we present the shows in a way, like you said, Oliver, it's a very dark show, but our production at Temple really tempered all of that and presented it in a way that was acceptable to our generation now and also the families of today. So it's a balancing act.
Well, and I think when you look at a show like Dolly, what I got out of the recent revival is that she was a very empowered woman for that time period.
Correct. Yeah. Well, she had to be resourceful. Her husband passes away, and in that time, he was the breadwinner. And what is she going to do for a living? She created an entire means of employment for herself, and in addition to that, is literally matching people up and finding love, and is very adept at it too. As comedic as it is throughout the show, how she does it, she's still very successful at what she does.
So what advice, knowing now what you know, what advice would you give that tap dancing kid who was aspiring to be a dancer on the stage?
That's interesting because the business has changed so much from when I was in my 20s and aspiring and starting out. And that has a lot to do with social media. It has a lot to do with how kids, how the younger generation now has to present themselves and be prepared for that. The advice I have is you can never stop working. And the reason why I say I don't dance now is because I've let my dancing go. It's like any muscle. If you stop using a muscle, it eventually atrophies. It's the same thing with playing any instrument and doing those things. If you want to be a dancer, it's not just about talent alone. Back in the day in the 1930s, when somebody had some dance skills, they could go to an audition and become a star. Now, the level and quality of skill is so much higher now that you have to keep working at it, and you have to constantly be willing to improve, and you have to constantly improve. That's the thing that this younger generation is, a lot of things are very instantaneous to them because of the internet and because of things they have. We talk about, I walked up hills, to school in the snow, and, we had to go to the library to do a research paper, but for that younger artist out there, everything is a learning experience, no matter how you take it, and learn from everywhere. Even though you want to be a dancer, you're still going to be asked to be an actor, because dancers are actors in a sense. So you can't just rely on your dance skill alone. You're eventually going to be open your mouth and say some lines. You're eventually going to have to sing. So if you do want to have a career in theater, you have to constantly be working and constantly improving, and have an open enough mind to, let those things in, and stay focused on that dream and what you want. I always consider myself a master of all things. A master of all things, and jack of all trades, master of none is really what it is. And I do a lot of things, and I often tell myself, had you just focused on one thing, you'd be very successful at it. But in my now I can look back hindsight, had I not learned to play the piano and worked hard at playing the piano, there's a part of my career that would be gone, that I would not have eaten, because I literally, could play the piano. And the same thing with being a choreographer and keeping myself open to that, and being an actor. I don't always enjoy every acting gig that I take. I have in my prime now when I'm in my 50s, because I only take the ones I want to do. But there was a time when you had to rely on taking everything you could to put food on your table, and it's not an easy profession to go into, and you have to be willing to sacrifice. And I think that's one of the reasons why I was really quick to go into the administrative side of things, because I couldn't deal with the disappointment, and there's a lot of disappointment. And that's the thing with young dancers starting out today. There's a lot more competition, and there's a lot of disappointment, and it has nothing to do with your talent. It has nothing to do with, it's sometimes it's being in the right place at the right time, but having that thick skin enough to be able to keep going when everybody else tells you you shouldn't, and that's tough.
Are you able to share with us what's going to happen at Temple? I know there's a bunch of contingency plans on
We do have a bunch of contingency plans, and of course all of that is, we have a summer session that's supposed to be coming up, and our parents and our kids are literally chomping at the bit to come back, and we're chomping at the bit to have them back because we miss them all desperately. And so we have contingency plans in place, but until we get a plan from the governor to say, okay, you're allowed to have assembly, and until we find out, is it assembly of 100 people? Is it an assembly of 50%? We're not exactly sure what that is. It's our plan that we're going to have some sort of summer session coming up with our kids. We don't know what that's going to look like, but the minute we find out, we literally have them all ready to go, that when the governor says, okay, we have 3 different scenarios to put out there to troubleshoot it. The same thing with our season. We unfortunately had to cancel Steel Magnolias and Mamma Mia at the time. And right now we were having people, they could choose between donating their tickets, and we totally appreciate everyone who has donated their tickets back to the company. That is a great help to us. You could refund your tickets, which we've been working on refunding tickets now, and we were having people exchange them. Well, now we're to the point, because we've canceled, we're getting to the point of a new fiscal year. So now people, our ticket holders for Steel Magnolias and Mamma Mia, have to decide if they're going to donate, which we hope they do, or get a refund. And then we're hoping to put those in next season, sort of shift the season around, and still have a full season starting in the fall. But if the governor comes back and says we can't have that, we have another contingency plan to work through. So they just need to stay current with our Facebook page, follow us, Temple Theater Company on Facebook, and then also templeshows.com. We put out an email from Peggy every Friday. We keep everybody up to date on Fridays, and we put it out there to let them know what's happening. Of course, Tuesday is Giving Tuesday. So if you think about it, go to our Facebook page and donate for Giving Tuesday. And then also on our website, if you hit support, there's a donate button for Giving Tuesday, and that will be incredibly helpful for us. We're one of the fortunate companies, the smaller organizations. We did get a PPP loan, so we are back to work. We were furloughed for a while. And so now we're back and trying to catch up on all of those things that when we were unemployed that we're trying to do. But just stay current with what we're doing. But hopefully Mamma Mia and Steel Magnolias will happen in the fall. But again, until we find out, we'll see what happens.
And it is a really lovely theater to go to.
It really is.
Family-friendly shows, not kid shows necessarily, just family-friendly. And the downtown Sanford area is really starting to kind of turn over, and there's a lot of interesting galleries, stores, places to eat. So
it's Sanford's building, and there are 2 new housing plans, one that's going to be north of Sanford and one down near Fayetteville, that are going to bring in a lot more families, because everything from Raleigh is sort of pushing southwest toward us. And so the city becomes, the town becomes larger and larger. And we do have wonderful restaurants to eat in before you come to a show. And there are great places to go to after the show is actually done as well. And one of the things that we're chomping at the bit to get back at, Temple Theater is one of the biggest revenue generators for the town itself. A lot of people come to the town for Temple. And so we're hoping we can get back to business because that in turn helps all of the other businesses in our area.
And there's some great singing and dancing there.
We try our best. We really
Great
do.
dancing. Um, well, thank you for spending the hour with me. What is on your pandemic playlist? What are you listening to? Musical theater? Or are you listening to opera?
No, it's funny. I've been doing it for so long and been in the business so long that I like quiet sometimes. So I don't really listen. If I have a project going at home, I might put something in, and it'll always be what's, as strange as this sounds, the movie soundtrack of Hair is one of my favorite soundtracks ever. That's always my first go-to thing. Yeah, I don't know why. The soundtrack from Hair. If you haven't listened to it, listen to the soundtrack from Hair, not the Broadway original cast recording. The soundtrack from Hair is one of my go-tos. But I always go to the musicals that I gravitate toward the ones I can't be in, because if you've worked on it, you don't want to listen to it again. Or if you're working on it, that's what I'm always listening to the one that I'm working currently on. But I usually tend toward musical theater things that I never will be in or work on. So
well, maybe I'll have you back to do a theater trivia night for us.
I would love to do
So
that.
much fun.
I'm Dina Muro's phone a friend when it comes to musical theater trivia. So that's me. But
Ooh, I love
we didn't
it.
even talk about we actually really didn't talk about Cats much, but that's okay because that was 25 years ago and I barely remember it.
Well, I was just trying to get over the trauma of seeing the movie, honestly.
Yeah, well, that's really, and I haven't, so you've told me I shouldn't, so I don't think I will.
No, don't see the movie. And I hate to say that because I really do like musical movies,
Yeah,
but just not that one.
yeah. Understandably. And someday we might bring Cats back to the temple. Peggy had a really wonderful, successful production of Cats a few years ago, and we'll bring it back to the temple. So you'll get to see it again in its form, in its stage form.
Well, I hope to see you at the temple soon.
Me too. Yes.
And like I said, if you haven't been, please go. They have a lovely season planned. So just keep up with them on social media to see what's happening.
Yeah, we are selling season subscriptions for next year. So if you are a subscriber this year and you want to subscribe again, that income is helping us at this time right now.
And Hello Dolly is on next year's season.
Hello Dolly is on next season. Yes, it is on next season.
So that's and I don't remember what other shows are on. I was trying to think of what other shows are.
We have Blood Done Sign My Name. We have Driving Miss Daisy. We have Church Basement Ladies 4. And another one of my favorites, it's a show that I just love, is Frank Sinatra. It's My Way, a tribute to Frank Sinatra. It's all of Frank Sinatra's great music. It's a cast of 4 with a live band. And I did the show with Peggy back in Pittsburgh years ago. And it's so nice to get to do the show again and bring it here to the temple because it's wonderful music and people will love it.